In 2008, Disney unveiled The King of the Elves, a surreal new animated film that felt shockingly un-Disney. And then they killed it before audiences could experience it. A dangerous fantasy from the noir-soaked writer behind R-rated sci-fi worlds like Blade Runner and Total Recall. Now, Disney wasn't making Blade Runner. They were adapting a strange Philip K. Dick fantasy story. And this wasn't just some online rumor. It had directors, a real Christmas 2012 release window, and an official spot on Disney's future animation calendar. But instead of becoming Disney's next big fantasy adventure, King of the Elves became a movie that they spent years trying to fix, until it was finally swallowed by the depths of the vault. So how do you get such a bizarre collision between the dystopian author of Blade Runner and the endless optimism of a Walt Disney animated feature?
From the magic within our hearts, there is only one Disney.
But as weird as that mashup sounds, Philip K. Dick's The King of the Elves only gets stranger once you understand what Disney was actually adapting. On the surface, it's a deceptively simple fantasy. A lonely old man running a small-town Colorado gas station unknowingly stumbles into a hidden war between elves and trolls. But after one act of kindness, the elves ask him to replace their recently deceased king and help defend the Elf Kingdom. The catch is, nobody in town believes him, which leaves the story hanging on one uneasy question. How real are any of these fantastical events? Published in a 1953 issue of Beyond Fantasy Fiction, The King of the Elves came right at the beginning of Philip K. Dick's career, but his unmistakable fingerprints were already all over it.
I started out as a pulp writer, doing stories for pulp magazines, and I never imagined myself to have any importance.
That feeling of being an unimportant nobody, a longing for the world around you to be more than what it seems, and that fragile line between delusion and a hidden reality.
My name is not Quaid.
And yet, 55 years after it was published, Walt Disney Animation put The King of the Elves on its official calendar, set to follow Tangled as part of the studio's next wave of features.
We all stand together in a strong belief of the type of movies that we want to make. These movies are for families, but they're also for adults.
But the question was, how much of this unassuming psychological tale would have to be demolished to rebuild it as a full-blown Walt Disney animated fantasy?
You populate that story with really appealing and memorable characters, and put that story and those characters in a believable world. Believable for the story you're telling.
Almost immediately, both the characters and the world of the King of the Elves started changing under Disney. The thing was, what they changed into depends entirely on which version of the movie we're talking about. Development really began to take shape in 2006 under Brother Bear co-directors Aaron Blaise and Robert Walker. And by 2008, Disney was already treating it like a major holiday release, complete with the premium digital 3D treatment. This was a big deal for Walt Disney Animation, which was still trying to find its identity after the hand-drawn era had largely come to an end. Early CG experiments like Chicken Little and Meet the Robinsons had fallen short of their own expectations, so King of the Elves wasn't just another movie on the calendar. It was one possible answer to the question of what a modern Disney animated feature could even look like. But before long, that answer was already starting to change shape.
And I started developing a film called King of the Elves, The King of the Elves. And we thought it could be really neat if we placed it in the South and gave it blues music and all kinds of really cool stuff. And Disney loved it.
The old man's search for meaning was still at the center, but Disney was already pulling the story out of its quiet small-town Colorado setting and into a more colorful Mississippi Delta world of blues music, folklore, and fantasy. And from there, the team still had to answer one of the biggest questions. What were these elves even supposed to look like? Should they be cute and cuddly like traditional Disney characters? Reptilian, insect-like, or mythological creatures that look like they had crawled out of the earth itself? But that version of the film would never fully come into focus. During development, Blaze's wife tragically passed away from cancer, eventually leading him to step away.
I tried to go back to work, tried to work on this film. I tried for like a year and a half and it just wasn't working. And until finally John took me off the film.
With Blaze gone, this version of King of the Elves quickly stalled and was shelved, but the idea itself wasn't dead yet. By 2011, the film was reportedly back on. The concept had been retooled and was now targeting a late 2013 release. Bolt co-director Chris Williams stepped into the director's chair, while story revisions were now being handled by one of the writers of Horrible Bosses, a reshuffle that pointed towards a very different kind of movie.
What do you mean by trim the fat?
I want you to fire the fat people. You can start with Large Marge. Marge, can you come in here, please?
Now, the surviving material is pretty limited, but what little has surfaced suggests that the project had shifted from a mythological dramatic fantasy into something lighter, comedic, and more off-kilter. Though even after reworking the tone, the team still couldn't crack the bigger problem. How do you turn this small, ambiguous fantasy into a Disney-sized animated blockbuster?
I was supposed to be head of animation on a film called King of the Elves.
Okay.
It was a fantasy movie that Disney was developing, and eventually it went into the hands of Chris Williams, and that's, I think, when I came on. I was going to be head of animation on that, and maybe a year into it, I think Chris Williams decided this wasn't the movie he wanted to make, and he kind of stepped back from it, and the movie kind of dissolved in our fingers.
The more Disney reshaped this intimate psychological tale, the clearer it became that each iteration wasn't getting closer to a finished film. Instead, it was slipping further out of focus. And soon, Disney would have to come to terms with the fact that the King of the Elves might just be forever out of their reach.
Quality is the best business plan. And every now and then you come along and no matter what, notes you've given and things you've tried and shifting of personnel and stuff like that, there's something, it's just not, a film is not living up to the potential we know it has. And we know it needs to be.
That lighter version was the last real sign of life we ever got from the King of the Elves. And looking at what else was happening inside Disney at the time, it was pretty clear why. While it was slipping further from Disney's future, their other explorations were starting to point in a different, more straightforward direction.
Go. Live your dream.
I will.
Your dream stinks. I was talking to her.
Tangled released in late 2010 as a marriage between classic Disney fairy tale storytelling and polished 3D computer animation, all wrapped in a snappy, self-aware tone.
I've always yearned to be a concert pianist.
Audiences found it funny, charming, and magical. And most important to the decision makers, it was a smashing box office success. To Disney, this was enough to suggest that they had found the future they had been searching for.
Hi. You're creepy.
And in that future, a film about a lonely gas station attendant discovering that the world around him was more than it seems just didn't fit. Disney had found a much deeper well in big, broad, modern animated spectacles, the kind that could ignite the box office, fuel merchandising, and grow into entire franchises. And no amount of tinkering was going to turn King of the Elves into that. The tragedy isn't that Disney threw away an obvious classic for being too dark. It's that the movie kept pointing toward a version of Disney animation the studio could never realistically become. A future it kept hinting at, but could never fully commit to. And if King of the Elves was Disney's impossible fantasy, wait until you see how Pixar brutally axed their dark fantasy from the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas.